Have you ever sat across from someone you love and felt miles away? The words are there, the gestures are there, yet something vital is missing. You smile, you nod, you play your role, but deep inside there's a quiet emptiness, a hollow space where closeness should live. This is the ache no one talks about, the loneliness you feel while lying next to someone, the unspoken disconnection that grows silently between two people who once promised to be each other's everything. You've tried to explain it, but explanations fall flat. You've waited for change, softened your needs, convinced yourself that maybe you're asking for too much. And yet, the hunger for real intimacy only grows stronger. It's not that love is absent, it's that love feels unfulfilled. You crave presence, depth, honesty, not just the comfort of routine, but the fire of being seen, understood, and cherished. Instead, you find yourself shrinking in silence, wondering if the problem is you, wondering if this emptiness is your burden to carry alone. In today's video, we will explore the truth behind that dissatisfaction. Why even in committed relationships, one can feel unseen and untouched in the ways that matter most. We'll uncover how unmet needs slowly erode connection, and why ignoring this ache can be more dangerous than confrontation. By the end, you'll understand that your longing is not weakness, but a compass, pointing you back to what your heart truly deserves. You'll see that dissatisfaction isn't a sign of failure, but a call for awakening. And most importantly, you'll begin to remember that asking for more isn't selfish. It's sacred, so stay with us. If you've ever felt the quiet ache of being unsatisfied in love, this message is for you. Watch until the end and leave a comment saying, "My heart deserves depth," to anchor this truth into your journey. Dissatisfaction in love rarely arrives with drama. It doesn't come crashing down like thunder. Instead, it seeps in quietly, like water finding its way through cracks. One day, you notice the conversations no longer touch your soul. The gestures are there, but the essence feels hollow. The other's presence is physical, but not psychological. This slow drift is not just about the relationship, it is about the psyche. As Carl Jung said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that are important to oneself. And that is the true weight of silence. When what matters most in your inner world cannot find a place in the shared space of love, you begin to withhold your dreams, your fears, your deepest truths, because each attempt to reveal them feels unanswered or unseen. The energy shifts. You perform the rituals of partnership, dinners, routines, conversations, but the symbolic fire, the archetypal union of souls, begins to dim. What once felt like communion becomes mere coexistence. From a Jungian perspective, this dissatisfaction is not simply personal. It is archetypal. The self longs for integration, for wholeness, for a partner who meets not just the body but the inner world of symbols, shadows, and spirit. When that call goes unheard, the unconscious begins to speak through restlessness, dreams, and an unshakable sense of incompleteness. But here lies the opportunity. Your dissatisfaction is not betrayal of love, but an invitation to deeper individuation. It asks you to stop settling for surface and to demand soul. To remember that true intimacy is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of truth. So pause here and reflect. Are you merely maintaining the mask of relationship, or are you daring to step into authentic connection? Comment below with the words, "My soul seeks truth," to affirm that your longing is sacred, not a weakness, but a guide. Dissatisfaction often reveals itself not in words, but in what is missing. You feel it in the pauses, in the absence of depth, in the hollow spaces where intimacy should dwell. This is not merely disappointment with a partner. It is the confrontation with what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow holds everything we repress, deny, or fail to integrate. In relationships, It emerges when unspoken needs are ignored, when authentic feelings are silenced for the sake of harmony. Over time, this silence becomes a haunting presence, a void that speaks louder than any argument. What is denied in the light returns in the dark, through dreams, projections, and restless dissatisfaction. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. How often do we call this emptiness normal, convincing ourselves that passion always fades, that longing is unrealistic? Yet, beneath the mask of resignation, the unconscious is pulling at us, demanding that we face what is hidden. When your partner no longer feels like your mirror, when their presence leaves you lonelier than solitude, it is not just about them. It is a summons from your own psyche. The archetype of the lover demands depth, truth, and integration. When those elements vanish, dissatisfaction becomes a sacred signal that you are betraying your deeper self. The danger lies not in the conflict, but in the denial of it. The more you suppress the ache, the more it rules you from the shadows. The more you pretend to be satisfied, the more you fracture within. And eventually, that fracture becomes unbearable. But here, too, is the possibility. The shadow does not come to destroy, but to awaken. The absence you feel is an initiation. It asks you to recognize where you have abandoned yourself, where you have silenced your own voice, and where you have confused comfort with love. Take this moment to reflect. Is your dissatisfaction a sign of your partner's failure, or of your own soul demanding more? Comment below with "I choose to see the shadow," to affirm your willingness to face what has been hidden. For only in this confrontation does true transformation begin. When dissatisfaction grows too heavy to ignore, something begins to stir within. It is the soul's call to sovereignty. Jung taught us that the journey of individuation, the process of becoming whole, often begins with discomfort, with a fracture that refuses to be numbed. As Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And in relationships, this acceptance often requires us to confront the places where we have abandoned ourselves for the sake of peace. Dissatisfaction is rarely just about the other. It is about the parts of us we have silenced in order to be loved. In this stage, the archetype of the sovereign rises. You begin to see that the longing you feel is not simply for another's affection, but for your own authenticity. The question shifts from, "Why doesn't my partner give me more?" to "Why have I allowed myself to accept less?" This turning inward is not rejection of love. It is the reclamation of your own center. True sovereignty in love is not cold detachment. It is rootedness in the self. It is knowing that intimacy cannot flourish where one abandons their own truth. Without sovereignty, relationships collapse into dependency, projection, and endless cycles of disappointment. With sovereignty, they become spaces of genuine encounter, where two whole beings meet without losing themselves. Here lies the paradox. The moment you stop begging for fulfillment from the outside and begin to embody your own wholeness, the dynamic shifts. Either the relationship transforms to meet you at this higher level, or it fades away, revealing that it was never strong enough to hold the truth. Your dissatisfaction, then, becomes a threshold. It is the door through which you must walk if you are to stop living half a life. It is not a curse. It is your initiation into the deeper mystery of love that is rooted not in need, but in conscious choice. Pause and ask yourself, am I clinging to comfort at the expense of my own sovereignty? Comment below with the words, "I choose myself." If you are ready to reclaim what has always been yours, the power to live and love without self-betrayal. When dissatisfaction emerges, it is not simply one person's burden. In truth, it is the psyche of the relationship itself speaking. Carl Jung often reminded us that every connection between two people is not only personal, but archetypal. The union of two souls forms what he called the third thing. a living field, a psychic space where both partners project their inner worlds. As Carl Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when the reaction no longer transforms, when it stagnates, when growth halts? Dissatisfaction becomes the alarm bell, signaling that the shared space has grown stale and needs renewal. This awakening does not demand blame. It is not about naming one as giver and the other as withholder. It is about recognizing that the relationship has become unconscious, that both partners are moving through rituals without presence, playing roles instead of living truth. In such a space, projections dominate. One becomes the disappointing partner, the other the endless seeker, and the authentic meeting of souls is lost. But the psyche never rests. Through dissatisfaction, the unconscious insists that the relationship awaken. It asks, will you continue repeating the pattern of silence and pretense, or will you both step into the courage of authenticity? True transformation begins when partners dare to confront not only each other, but themselves, their projections, their wounds, their unmet shadows. This is not easy. Individuation within relationship demands that each partner take responsibility for their own inner work. To withdraw their projections and see the other not as savior or oppressor, but as a mirror. It means asking, what part of myself have I placed in the other? What part of me is longing to return home? If both accept this invitation, dissatisfaction becomes sacred. It is no longer a threat, but a doorway into deeper intimacy. The relationship itself can awaken, moving from unconscious routine into conscious union. Every relationship eventually arrives at a threshold. Do you continue sacrificing your authentic self for the illusion of harmony, or do you dare to choose truth, even if it disrupts the familiar? As Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet in love, we often forget this privilege. We trade authenticity for approval, silence our needs for stability, and confuse sacrifice with devotion. Slowly, the self shrinks while the relationship becomes a stage for roles rather than a meeting of souls. Dissatisfaction, then, becomes the signal that sacrifice has gone too far. It reveals the places where one or both partners have abandoned their inner truth to keep the connection alive. But what is kept alive in this way is not love. It is an arrangement, a performance, a hollow shell. The sacred choice is not between love and self. It is between illusion and authenticity. To choose the self is not to abandon the other, but to invite them into a higher form of love. It means saying, I will not betray who I am to keep this fragile peace. If we are to continue, it must be as two whole beings, not two shadows pretending. When one partner chooses authenticity, the relationship must evolve or dissolve. And this is the true test. Some unions will not survive the fire of truth. Others will be purified by it, burning away projections and false roles until only real intimacy remains. Jung called this process individuation, the painful yet liberating path of becoming whole. Within relationship, individuation asks both partners to stand in their sovereignty and meet each other as equals, not as rescuers or dependents. This is why dissatisfaction is sacred. It is not punishment, it is initiation. It offers you the chance to reclaim the self that was hidden, the voice that was silenced, the soul that was waiting to be honored. And in doing so, you give the relationship its only true chance to transform. There comes a moment when dissatisfaction can no longer be hidden. The words may still be unspoken, but the absence is felt everywhere. It lingers in the pauses of conversation, in the heaviness of touch, in the distance behind each glance. Silence becomes the loudest voice in the relationship. As Carl Jung said, what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. And so, The silence that was once meant to keep peace now becomes the very thing that unravels it. The unconscious has spoken through absence, and its message is impossible to ignore. For one partner, the silence feels like rejection. For the other, it feels like suffocation. But in truth, it is neither. It is the psyche demanding honesty. The relationship has reached its reckoning, not through betrayal, not through explosive fights, but through the weight of what has been denied. This reckoning is not about blame. It is about the mirror. Each partner must look within and ask, what have I hidden? What truth have I avoided? What part of myself have I expected the other to carry? The silence is not punishment, it is reflection. It forces both to see not only the other's shortcomings, but their own projections, fears, and compromises. In Jungian terms, this is the confrontation with the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine each person projects onto their partner. When these projections collapse, disappointment sets in. But disappointment is not the end. It is the first step towards seeing the other as they truly are, rather than as the idealized figure of your unconscious. The reckoning of silence strips away illusion. What remains is raw, unpolished, sometimes painful, but real. And from this reality, two paths emerge. Either the relationship deepens through authenticity, or it dissolves under the weight of avoidance. Both are sacred. Both are truth. Not every ending is destruction. In the language of the psyche, every death carries the seed of rebirth. Dissatisfaction, silence, and absence, these are not always signs of failure, but thresholds. Jung taught us that transformation often begins with breakdown, for only what is cracked open can be reformed into something whole. As Carl Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. In relationship, this pain of dissatisfaction can become the very ground upon which a new intimacy is built. But it requires courage. Both partners must stop clinging to what was and step into the unknown of what might be. When two people dare to face their shadows, when they stop projecting and begin to own their wounds, something shifts. The relationship ceases to be a stage for old patterns and becomes a crucible for growth. Individuation, which Jung saw as the path of the soul, can then happen not only in solitude but in union. The partnership transforms from a cage into an alchemy, where each partner's wholeness fuels the other's. This rebirth is not a return to how things used to be. It is not about rekindling old passion or forcing routine back into comfort. It is the birth of a new relationship, one that begins only when both partners meet as sovereign individuals, no longer seeking to complete each other, but to walk side by side in truth. And here lies the paradox. Often, the love that emerges after dissatisfaction is stronger than the love that existed before, because now it is not based on illusion, projection, or unspoken sacrifice. It is based on authenticity, honesty, and conscious choice. But this rebirth is not guaranteed. It requires that both say yes to truth, to discomfort, to the unknown. And if only one partner chooses this path, the rebirth will happen anyway, but it may be a rebirth of the individual rather than the couple. Either way, the psyche wins, because truth has been honored. At the heart of every relationship lies a paradox. We are drawn to another not only for who they are, but for what they reflect within us. Jung spoke of the anima and animus, the inner feminine within the man and the inner masculine within the woman. These archetypal forces live in all of us, and in love, we project them onto our partners. As Carl Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Dissatisfaction often arises when these projections collapse. The partner no longer fulfills the role of savior, ideal, or missing half. Instead, they appear in their humanity, with flaws, limitations, and their own shadows. This collapse can feel like disillusionment, but in truth, it is initiation. It is the moment when you are invited to reclaim what you had projected. The tenderness you demanded from the other may be the anima within you, waiting to be honored. The strength you sought in your partner may be the animus within you, asking to be embodied. The path forward, then, is not to demand that the other carry your wholeness, but to integrate these opposites within yourself. When you embody both your inner masculine and feminine, you cease to cling to the other for completion. Instead, you meet them as a whole being, free, sovereign, and capable of true intimacy. And this is where love transforms. For when two individuals have integrated their opposites, the relationship is no longer fueled by need, but by conscious choice. The union becomes symbolic of the conjunctio oppositorum, the sacred marriage of opposites that Jung saw as the highest expression of individuation. In this space, dissatisfaction dissolves, not because every need is perfectly met, but because the relationship no longer carries the impossible burden of being your other half. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a dance between two whole souls, each reflecting and challenging the other, yet never losing themselves in the process. What we experience in our most intimate relationships is never only personal. Every silence, every ache of dissatisfaction, every longing for depth, these are not isolated struggles. They are echoes of the collective psyche. Jung reminded us that we are shaped not only by our own unconscious, but also by the collective unconscious, the vast field of archetypes and cultural patterns we inherit. As Carl Jung said, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. In relationships, we often carry not just our own wounds, but the unresolved patterns of those who came before us. The way we give too much, remain silent, or accept too little often mirrors generational scripts, archetypes of sacrifice, duty, or fear of abandonment. This means that dissatisfaction is not only your own, it is also ancestral. It is the voice of countless women and men who silenced themselves for survival. It is the echo of cultural ideals that told us love means endurance, not authenticity. It is the residue of myths that glorified suffering in the name of loyalty. When you feel the quiet ache in your relationship, you are not only confronting your own shadow, you are confronting the collective shadow of love itself. You are standing at the threshold of transformation, not only for yourself, but for the lineage that moves through you. Here lies the sacred responsibility. If you choose authenticity, if you honor your dissatisfaction as a call for truth, you do not heal only your own heart. You interrupt an entire pattern. You give permission for future generations to know love as depth, intimacy, and freedom, rather than silence and sacrifice. This is why your struggle matters. It is archetypal, not incidental. Your choice to awaken is a ripple that moves far beyond you. Every journey through dissatisfaction eventually leads back to the same place, the self. Jung taught us that individuation, the path of becoming whole, is the true purpose of life. And love, with all its beauty and all its struggles, is one of the greatest mirrors that guides us there. As Carl Jung said, the world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. In relationships, when we do not know ourselves, we hand over our truth in exchange for approval. We silence our longings. We shrink our needs. We pretend satisfaction where there is none. Until one day, the ache becomes unbearable and dissatisfaction becomes our teacher. But this is not a failure of love. It is love's deeper invitation. Dissatisfaction does not come to punish, but to awaken. It asks us to stop betraying ourselves and to step into authenticity. It calls us to integrate our shadows, reclaim our projections, and honor both the masculine and feminine within. And when we do, we stop seeking completion outside and start embodying wholeness within. The gift of this path is sovereignty. For once you know yourself, Once you live as a whole being, you no longer beg for crumbs of affection. You no longer confuse sacrifice with devotion. You no longer stay silent when your soul longs to speak. Instead, you love from fullness, not emptiness. You give without losing yourself. You receive without guilt. Some relationships will transform with you, rising into this new level of authenticity. Others will dissolve, unable to withstand the light of truth. Both outcomes are sacred, because the real journey was never about keeping a partner. It was about remembering yourself. So if you are living with dissatisfaction, know this: it is not the end. It is a threshold. It is the place where your soul asks you to rise, to awaken, to remember. Comment below with "I return to myself" if these words resonate with you. Let them anchor your truth as you step into a love that begins not with another, but with your own wholeness. And if this message spoke to your soul, share it, because countless others are carrying this same ache, waiting for the same reminder that dissatisfaction is not emptiness. It is the beginning of rebirth. Your soul is ready. Your self is calling. The time is now.